Hello, welcome to our chat. Today I am very happy to host Dragan Stepanović, a very talented engineer with lots of experience. I've been eagerly following a lot of Dragan's writings. Appreciate the originality and the wisdom of his content. And as you know, we're always looking for original ideas. The focus of this channel is searching for breakthroughs in our profession, software, creating software. And today, August 6th, we're still in pandemic, very frustrating situation, but people keep ignoring science. I'm upset about that. But maybe we can help move the needle. So I think Dragan here is going to give us a lot of insight into how can we improve the process of creating software. And I know, Dragan, you have very solid engineering foundation, but also are now branching into understanding how to work in teams. So why don't you tell us more about your approach?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Alex. A bit about myself. I've been in the industry for quite a long time, time long enough to remember lots of the things and repeating history as well. I initially started with XP. So extreme programming is a field that I really hold close to my heart. And I guess every XPer has their own interesting story to tell about how they got into it. I stumbled upon it pretty randomly, but I'm still in this rabbit hole, so to say. I'm searching actively for other ways of working as well, and I'm augmenting those, but XP seems to be one of these core ideas that still kind of sustains the time in terms of the effectiveness and also, or even more important, the quality of the relationships that it builds and the teams and the trust and the psychological safety. So yeah, a bit after that, I was kind of curious to get into. I'm a big fan of design, so I got also more into the architecture and domain-driven design, strategic and tactical. Although I started with the technical first, as most of the DDDers do, which is not really good advice actually, looking back. But architecture, high scalability. I've been working with on a couple of highly scalable products with tens of millions of users. Um, Very risky kind of um, in terms of the development and error margin, so to say, because the cost of the errors was quite expensive. And a couple of years ago, I think 4 or 5 years ago, I stumbled upon theory of constraints, which is one of the topics that have been very influential for me. And after that, lean and systems thinking. So those are some of the things that I am kind of mostly interested in the last couple of years. But finally, I started closing the circle with XP and trying to understand how does XP systems thinking, lean and theory of constraints fall into place, and trying to connect these worlds, which is really interesting kind of story and lots of really interesting unexpected discoveries, so to say. That's a bit about me. I work as a principal engineer at HelloFresh, and yeah.
Thank you. So we've been hearing a lot about the contentious nature of Agile, where a lot of people nowadays are jumping on the bandwagon, and then there's a lot of the original Agile team, which created a manifesto, are kind of being disillusioned and saying, well, it's not really going in the direction where we wanted it to go. And you probably know, the bastardization of Agile with scaled Agile and all these other frameworks that basically go against the grain of the spirit of the agile. But for many of us, I think we are rediscovering as XP as something that, even though it was formulated about quarter of a century ago, seems to hold. And unlike agile, which is going through some twists and turns and transformations, and there's different ways of trying to repackage agile and resell it. Seems like XP is not changing much. Uh, the same principles, the same fundamental things from 25 years ago still hold. And I don't know if you have a different experience or if you feel like it's kind of proven, time proven that these things work and there's not much need to enhance them or modify them or adapt them to a different situation. Seems to me that's pretty solid, and it just keeps chugging, just going and proving its worth. Is that your impression?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a really kind of interesting topic. And I think the reason for that is like this strong coherence of the practices that were introduced in the XP and how tightly they connect to each other. It's, just I tend to see it by in terms of the cases where I get to advise a team or consult or coach and mentor them, and they got interested into XP, and everyone wants to try new things incrementally, right? So we don't want big batches and stuff. So they ask, can we choose only one technique or one practice from XP, right? From these core practices at least, which is pair programming, the simple design, test-driven development, refactoring, right? Um, and and interestingly, all of my attempts to introduce only one practice failed, right? And because once we start with that, it pulls in other things that it needs in order to survive, the other practices around it. So I think this coherence really kind of, as a feedback, bubbled up in these cases because I found it kind of interesting. Like, how do you introduce XP incrementally? And failing to do that, I mean, in a sense of just picking one practice, maybe that slicing strategy is not a good one in the first place. But anyway, cherry picking only one thing doesn't work, and it's not able to live, so to say. So, and I think it really helped XP to sustain this amount of time. That's kind of one thing, and the other reason is also, I mean, all this kind of discussion and discourse related to really heavyweight methods of agility, so the capital A, so to say, and certificates and stuff like that, which is kind of also interesting. I think it's a really kind of systemic problem in a sense that there are so many factors that factored in this story. One of those is the demand that has been generated inside of our industry, and by that mere fact, it attracts lots of people. So we try to kind of, I mean, there are always so to say, parts of the industry that try to make use of that, right? So lots of certifications, 2-day certificates during the weekend certificates, Scrum, whatever. But we somehow tend to fail at the things that we need to do in terms of the shortening feedback cycles, providing value to our customers, building teams with psychological safety and trust, high trust environments and stuff like that. So it's really, for me, kind of interesting, like how leaving out the XP practices in certain environments has caused these environments to crumble under their own weight, in a sense. And that's the reason why I find the XP practices, I mean, XP is way more than its practices, it's kind of philosophy, but I think that's a really kind of distinguishing factor that I noticed with XP and the other, so to say, agile methods or methodologies. So I don't know what's the accurate word to use for this purpose. So so yeah, that's kind of at least my experience with it, and there's a sad thing to that as well, because I was recently looking at the trend for one of the talks that I was preparing for the so we know that XP was quite popular at the end of 90s and start of 2000s, and it was way more popular than other methodologies related to Agile, Scrum being one of those. And I was really curious to see when did Scrum take over in terms of the popularity, so to say. So one of the proxy ways to do that was to go to Google Trends and see when do these curves when was this inflection point, and it was somewhere around 2006, 2007. So that's kind of interesting, and I think it'd be really interesting to go back in time and to understand this period between like dominance of XP until we got to this inflection point, what happened for industry, because I think it's crucial. And the other thing is also that I think when you look at the size of our industry and the expansion rate that we have because of all of this generated demand, we have percentually wise, less and less people being familiar with these practices and this way of working, which is some fact that is a fact, but makes me sad at the same time. So both in absolute numbers and in percentual wise, XP is kind of getting more and more niche, right? So that's one thing. But on the other hand, there's also this saturation of fluffy approaches to agility, so to say, and that's also a chance for XP to kind of re-emerge in a sense. The other thing that is also a thing that I really appreciate about XP is, and maybe that's also related to it not being so popular as it was, is that it didn't suffer this semantic diffusion, what Martin Fowler calls. So it didn't, because it didn't have, I mean, it had popularity, but looking at the amount that it has currently, it was always kind of a bit of a niche, so to say, but it allowed it to keep its own original definition and mindset and the practices, and we know what is pair programming and we know what is statutory. There's no need to redefine these terms because the things have gained so much popularity that the original idea is lost. So that's, I think, also one kind of advantage that seems like current momentum can leverage in a sense. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great exposure. And again, my impression is that Agile and Scrum and all those things seem to be flexible in the sense that they're open to various interpretations. And like you say, people go cafeteria style. Okay, hold the mustard, and I'll take the tomatoes and whatnot. But like you said, XP seems to be cohesive, and you take one thing and you grab the whole thing. You cannot just separate this. Okay, I'll leave that on the side. I don't care about that. And so that's why we are now discovering the safety of XP. When things start falling apart and people start disagreeing in various agile practices. And let me ask you this: do you? And you bring a really interesting point about 2006, which it really coincides with my impressions, and mine are just like hunch, not study.
Mm-hmm.
There's something called cargo cult, because I think around that time we started all falling in love with Google and how they're like really, and monkey see, monkey do. So if Google is doing stand-ups, everybody must do stand-ups, whether it makes sense to you or not. And I feel like at that time people started jumping on the bandwagon. All the development teams started doing stand-ups, and it's just going through the motions, right, rather than seeing a positive impact of stand-ups necessarily. And so do you think there's a little bit of cargo cult there, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a natural one, so to say, because when you look at the medium that we have, lots of it is dominated by so-called big tech, right? FAANG companies and lots of engineering cultures try to replicate that one without even understanding the context in which they have emerged, right? So that's a first red flag, so to say. And it doesn't matter, if Google does monorepo, everyone, lots of people think that monorepos are good, and let's try to do it, or gRPC or whatever technology or whatever way of working without understanding the context. And the crucial question, does it solve the problem that we have in the first place? Or are we trying to find a problem for the solution that we have? So, so I think definitely that, but I think it's a natural thing to have in, like, when you think about, media, in a sense, it's dominated also. There's this kind of power law curve that is concentrated in the messages coming from a couple of sources, right? Being way more influential than anything else. So I think it's present, but I also see it as something that is, I would say, expected in a way to see. So. Um, and I'm kind of really curious what would happen, in a sense, had we had these companies trying out some of these practices and trying to popularize it, like using these channels, in a sense, to also promote or evangelize these practices for people to at least to try it out, to consider it, because this is currently a blind spot for a huge amount of the people in the industry, which is one thing that kind of makes me sad as well, since I see how much they are drowning in pressure and lack of trust, and being called at 2 a.m. in the morning, being woken up for the outage in production, and all of the hurt relationships between the stakeholders and the teams, and pressures, and customers, and churn, and blah blah blah. So yeah, I think it's one thing that can also be used as a leverage, right? So we're yet to see if they get to discover. I was recently kind of reading a post about I don't know, one of the FANG companies, one of the or a set of engineers, kind of being promoting testing, right, automated tests, and saying that they're not never going to go back to not doing testing. And it's kind of got really lots of retweets or likes or whatever. I don't remember even which social platform was it. And I think they are on this path to discover or rediscover practices from XP. So I think it's also kind of one of the leverage points and things to keep an eye on, right? When it comes to promoting these things. And on the other hand, the thing that I also notice is that there's lots of talk about psychological safety and trust in the teams, and vulnerability and acceptance, and things like that, which are very important. But the thing that I'm starting to think recently is I'm not sure that these things are the intervention points in the system, meaning they might be a monitoring point being a point in the system where there's a high sensitivity when the state changes, so we are able to detect the changes in the system, while the intervention point is a point in the system where we can, where there's a high leverage for a change. When there's a small change, there is a big impact to the system. So not to confuse psychological safety as being the intervention point, but being a monitoring point of the system, and looking for other points in the system where to intervene is something that I'm starting to think about. And actually, XP with its practices, I think it generates as a side effect psychological safety and trust. Like when you think about it, I'm not sure that you can have psychological safety and trust in the system, in the systems and organizations that are not able to continually deliver high quality software. Right? I think this is kind of precondition in order to have, like when you think about continuous delivery and XP, those things I think are actually precondition for a psychological safety in a sense. There's no amount of artificially induced or whatever ways of trying to increase the psychological safety that is going to save it without these things. So I see another kind of leverage point when it comes to XP and continuous delivery in a sense, like as an extension of XP, at least that's how I see it, or augmented XP. So yeah, that's kind of another thing that I think is also opening up with the popularity that is being, and with the traction that psychological safety as a term, and also the idea is gaining in our industry.
Okay, yeah, I have so many things to ask you, and I'm going to try now to put some things in order. I don't want this to turn into chaotic session, but I think we've started in the older days, in the earlier days. There was a lot of after the Second World War and whatnot, there was a lot of emphasis on productivity, being productive. And because, after the war devastation, the whole world started, okay, we have to rebuild. And it kind of became the mind share of, it's ingrained in everyone here that we come from the age of scarcity. Everything was scarce. You didn't have, needed shoes, needed clothing, housing. But today, I think we enter the world of abundance. And this focus on being insanely productive all the time, at the end of the day, we are basically clogging the oceans because we produce so much crap, and it's becoming harmful. So what we've started seeing, the shift, people who are leaders in thinking, I think there's been a little bit of shift from obsession with productivity and just make things, to more like the process itself, process of making. And then from that, the shift is coming to the makers, the people who are making. And I think that's where your psychological safety comes into play. And so today, I think, to me, XP was focused on the process of making, to really optimize that process, to eliminate waste, and, again, from lean and whatnot. And now what I'm reading a lot from your way of thinking, and of course other thought leaders, is let's focus on the people who are doing this process, because, like you say, if we optimize that, then the quality of delivery is guaranteed. If people feel good in their own skin, they feel satisfied in their own environment, then everybody is going to be creative and is going to contribute. So do you have any other thoughts on that kind of vector, from obsessing about productivity to obsessing about, let's make people awesome, let's make awesome environments where we all love our jobs?
Yeah. I think I have a quite controversial thinking on that, in a sense that I am completely up for healthy environments. I think they're a precondition to making great products and delivering value and finding joy in working. But I am not sure that is the intervention point in the system, trying to make people happy per se, right? So I think it's a side effect of the way that we work. And I mean, there's also a feedback loop there, a reinforcing one. If people don't feel joy at work and don't feel high level of trust and psychologically safety in the environment, the work that they produce is going to mirror that, right? So I think there's a feedback loop in there, but I'm not sure if only focusing on people being an intervention point in the system is the way to go about it. I find that focusing on the behavior, the ways that we go about the work, the practices, is actually the intervention point that can provide a bit more or more leverage in the system. And as a side effect of that, having continuously steady, high quality delivery, getting a satisfaction and high trust and psychological safety environments. The way that they connect it with this famous NUMI article from the factory, there's a paper that is kind of very popular, being written in Harvard Business Review, and it's a story about the company that has been a merger of Toyota and GM in the States, somewhere on the West Coast, and the factory that they talk about was the worst division in the whole country. And once they merged with Toyota, they noticed after some time that actually they're improving their results, and they improved it so much that it became the best performing division with the most satisfied employees in the whole country. So they were really curious to figure out what has happened there. And the paper actually talks about how to change a culture, which is very one of the really important topics in our industry. And the way that they proposed to go about it, or the way that they actually did it, was not to change, to try to influence the mindset, but they were influencing the behavior and what people were doing, which was influencing the mindset. Now, my wife is a psychotherapist, so I tend to have exposure to this field as well. And there's a modality in psychotherapy called REPT, which is Rational Emotional Behavior Therapy. And they have kind of a similar approach. There's a bell that has been ringing in my head once I read the article, which says that actually, in order to change the mindset, we change the way that we behave and the things that we do, which influences our mindset. So if we have irrational um, thoughts, so to say, about certain things. Like if people have insomnia, the way to go about it is, I mean, one of the ways is also trying to affect the mindset and questioning all the irrational um, assumptions and flawed assumptions behind these kind of dysfunctional behavior. But the leverage point actually being the way that we behave. So if I wake up very early in the morning, and not able to sleep, then instead of trying to stay in the bed until my bell rings, alarm rings, is actually something not to do. But what is recommended is to get up and start with your day, because there's usually the assumption that if I don't sleep enough during the day, I'm not going to be able to perform, right? So, and by actually waking up when person is not able to sleep and kicking off their day, going to the gym or whatever they start doing during the day is, and continuing doing this to a certain period, it kind of breaks this flawed assumption, this irrational fear of not being able to be productive, because actually they figure out that they're able to get productive and to be productive, which actually relieves the tension on their own mindset, and then it kind of helps with the sleep as a side effect. But that's the intervention point of trying to change the behavior, the way that we act, rather than the way that we think as an intervention point. The way that we think being kind of, so to say, monitoring intervention point rather than the monitoring point rather than the intervention point. So that's the way that I see also this topic about joy. Actually, it's a precondition, but I'm not sure if it's intervention point or actually being a side effect or monitoring point from the way that we work. So when I think about just trying to reduce the latency between the actors in the system, very mechanistic way of plastic way of saying, but if we do code reviews through some in an async manner through GitHub or whatever, and there's a high latency, we communicate not to the person but to the GitHub user ID, right? This high latency, this async way of working is actually hurting. We're paying the opportunity cost that we have actually compared to when we get to work together and have low latency, high throughput work, and we get to whatever pair or mob ensemble programming. And as a side effect, we build the relationships and trust, because we get to see that other people also make mistakes, and we accept them as that, because we also get acceptance for our mistakes. And that's the way to build vulnerability and trust and psychological safety as effect. But changing the way that we work was actually the intervention point, instead of trying to just trying to intervene on the surface level of psychological safety in terms of let's go for a team building, sure, but it's a punctual one. What can we do on a consistent basis continually? So in terms of the process, the way that you go about the work, it is going to produce this out of the box.
Wow, that's interesting. So not putting the cart before the horse, because it seems to be there's a danger of flipping over. But what do you think about Deming was talking about? No matter how brilliant the process is or the team is, it cannot beat a lousy system. Lousy system is unbeatable, and so we are thinking a lot about tweaking the system, as also as like you say, point of intervention. If you hopefully if you tweak the system in a correct way, then maybe it encourages that type of mechanistic behavior, which then produces the feeling of well-being or well adjusted or whatever, right? So I find a lot of we have certain principles or postulates that we discover that works, right? But I find a lot of times we then apply them to a different context, thinking that it used to work here, therefore it will certainly work over there. And that I think that could also be a source of the problem. To give you an example, we all have discovered that reaching the state of the flow is very beneficial. Like we just way more effective and productive when we hit that precious state of the flow. And for example, if you're writing an article, if you get yourself into the zone, right into the flow, then you really, you're doing your best. But then I find that we then apply that same approach to teamwork. And I find in the teamwork, that could be a bit, because state of the flow is very brittle. It's very hard, it's expensive. It's hard to get to that point. And once you get there, it's very easy to break it. And then you have to ramp up again. And, this gets amplified in a team environment where it's so hard to get to the flow, and then it's even easier to break it. And so, but yet we stick to that. We're like, okay, we have to get focused to get into that flow. And that's a very expensive expectation. So to me, that kind of is one illustration where we forcefully apply something that works in one environment, one setting, to another one, and stop being sensitized to seeking different ways. Or as Kent Beck said, if we think that we have reached the optimal way to socially work on software, we're just kidding ourselves. That's not. We should never stop and say, okay, this is it. This is the best way of doing things. Right? And he's very good at researching and experimenting with different ways of working. So right now I'm getting really interested in this because flow depends on stability. It's like sailing. If you go sailing, then it takes a while to set all the sails, and you're messing around. But eventually you hit that flow when the boat is just like gliding, right? And it's a beautiful feeling. It's effortless and it just keeps going. But if something disrupts it, you're back to square one. Now you have to again spend 20 minutes setting everything up and whatnot. So it depends on stability. But I'm more interested now in things that actually thrive on instability. And one of the things I'm really interested in is the beginner's mind. That sense of freshness and having complete viewing everything with complete fresh pair of eyes. And we are discovering that the beginner's mind, which basically thrives on instability, on not having competence, on having an open mind, is probably the best way to solve programming problems. It's much more efficient than if you come in as a competent, experienced engineer. The solutions we come from that angle are not nearly as good as the solutions we come up with the beginner's mind, right? So do you have any other examples? I'm curious, where what used to work in one context, we tend to forcefully shove into another context and insist it must work, and therefore there's a lot of waste around that.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, there are lots of examples, but one of the things is definitely kind of close day to day, so to say, is the let's say engineering culture, the way to different teams have completely different context because they have different social setting, different social dynamics, different structure and stuff like that. What I tend to see is that just parachuting people into the teams and thinking that is going to solve the problem because that's the skill that the the part of the team is needing, or the team is mostly needs, and expecting that is going to solve the things is very I would say illusional in a sense. So because every setting is a very, very different one. So trying to get from the scratch to understand what exactly is going on here and in order to try to to kind of come to the next evolutionary step in terms of the continuous improvement is kind of important. But like on a personal level, also, I think being curious is very important. No matter how experienced you are, or you think that you are. Also having in mind that people are trying to meet the people where they are and understanding that there is a reason for this thing being this way. So instead of me trying to, from day one, talk about the things that I think should be applied everywhere, maybe I can have a bit more of humility and beginner's mind and try to understand from other people what do they think are the things that led them up to this and in order to understand. So, which I think is also kind of important because I think it also kind of builds trust on a personal level, which is also important for buying and trying to change the things in a sense, and accepting others as being equally, so to say, important and knowledgeable, or in that sense. So yes, that's kind of. I mean, I get surprised all the time, right? I get surprised by pairing with people that someone would call them juniors or more. I think it's very dynamic thing. There's no really senior or junior. I learn lots from juniors. So in those cases, I am a junior, right? But I get surprised constantly by the new insights that I get from them, because the context is very much different. The things that we work on is very much different and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's one of the things, and yeah, I think also the instability is kind of important thing to have in terms of this volatility, because it tends to generate the novel things, because the system becomes less constrained in a sense, and because it becomes less constrained, there's more space for acceptive behavior, something that I recently learned from Dave Stolden and Kinevin model and complexity theory, which is kind of important because it helps also with the too much constrained system doesn't bring innovation and novelty, and it kind of limits the, so to say, the evolution and continuous improvement in a sense. So yes, I think it's important because it also tends to cause some amount of friction or pain in some way, and these things are super valuable because they are feedback, and this feedback is needed in order to kind of improve, so to say. So yeah, that's maybe somehow how I reason about it.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, what we are discovering is that it's quite easy to maintain that volatility, because um, I make a distinction between skills and competence. And traditionally, we value competence. We want to have a superstar ninja engineer who's super competent. But this is coming. This is actually from the old days when we were focused on individual expertise and individual performer. And right now, we are making huge breakthroughs and shifts into viewing the team as the smallest unit of performance. And so there's no higher resolution in the team. It's at that level of granularity. And within that team environment, uh, in my opinion, skills are way more important than competence. And skills are something that we could obtain quite quickly, in a matter of weeks or months, but competence takes years, if not decades. Right? So it's an expensive proposition. And so for example, what I'm discovering firsthand experience is when I'm facilitating mock programming, and having musical chairs rotation or every like 4 minutes creates this sense of instability and this kind of, you don't have time to settle into your area of competence, and I'm now the boss and I know exactly what's going on. You're being jolted out of it, right? And every 4 minutes we rotate, and that creates such a different type of energy and different type of thinking. And I find it phenomenally radically different and useful. And of course, when I'm facilitating these mobbing sessions, there's always somebody who just throws their hand up in the air and says, "This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life," and they just walk out. But those that stay, I discover that often at the end of the session, like, I can't wait for the next one.
Mhm.
So it's very interesting, right?
Mhm.
It's not, it's counterintuitive because, we still think about, okay, we have to have a boss, have an expert and a lead. But
Mhm.
like you said, all of a sudden, if skills are what really matters, and those skills are shared like rapid fire, right? Just like spread, then all of a sudden competence is not that important. But to have the team share the skills, all of a sudden you have a formidable team. If
Mhm.
everybody on the team can jump in and do anybody else's work, to me that's the holy grail, right? Instead of
Mhm.
saying, okay, well, Bob is not in today, we can't touch that part. We'll have to wait for him to come back from vacation.
Yeah.
Because talk about delivery, right? Continuous delivery. Shouldn't
Mhm.
wait on anyone, right?
Yeah.
So, but on the other side of things, I wanted to ask you. I'm making this kind of trajectory from uh, brittle systems. We used to have brittle system monoliths, and something happens, it breaks, and it takes forever to fix. And then we switch into agile system. They're really fast turnaround. Now I'm getting more and more interested in what we call anti-fragile systems, which means
Mhm.
on any stress, the system not only self-heals, but it becomes stronger. It
Yeah.
becomes less fragile. Do you have any uh, views on that? Have you experimented with?
Not really in a sense. Maybe not that I know of. In a sense that I mean, failure is inevitable. I guess that's
Yeah.
part of accepting that, and then seeing how can we use that as a leverage. But um, I see it as I see it in a sense as like this complex adaptive space and also uncharted territories, trying to roam around this uncharted territory, and that's what we tend to do is in terms of the product development. We don't tend to develop commodities because commodities can be bought off the shelf, right? And if that's the case, then the question is how to leverage this instability and this fragility because we know that we're going to be wrong. We know that something is going to fail. Whether it's a production system, whether it's us delivering something to users, them not wanting to use it at all, or in that sense. So I think I find it kind of important to like if I think about our industry, like just thinking about the chaos engineering and going around the system and trying to break the things intentionally, and also connecting that with the with for example the thing that I know of also is that a certain level of forest fires is healthy for a forest in
Mhm.
order to be able to evolve and to have a kind of balanced way or balanced set of different organisms that enable it to sustain. And so when I think also about chaos engineering, that's one of the things, but also thinking about the like knowing that we're going to fail is also important in terms of how do we build the mechanisms that allow us to, once we fail, that we learn from it and also minimize the amount of retracing that we have on this path, in this uncharted territory. So what do I mean by that is that, like, when I think about the climbers, and I also tend to think about test-driven development in the same sense. So when I think about the climbers, when they climb the rock, they have a huge incentive not to retrace too much, right? Not to fall. And for that reason, they're using anchors. So anchors, even though someone can think it slows them down, it will slow them down only in a totally predictive environment, which climbing the rock is not really the case. Maybe climbing the rock like 100 times already is a predictive environment. but most of the climbers are not climbing the same rock 100 times, right? So there's the reason why they use the anchors, and the anchors are there actually to help them speed up to have the fastest possible tempo until they go up, because they know they're going to fail, and they know they're going to retrace, and the anchors serve there to minimize the amount of retracing. So the same way I think about the reason about test-driven development or peer reviews, that shortening this feedback loop in this, so to say, infinitely uh, um, volatile or systems or environments that in which we definitely are going to fail. So with tests, we have ability. If I run tests every half a minute or a minute, then I minimize the amount of retracing that I have. So that's my anchor that I use. If I have a peer sitting next to me or rest of the mob sitting next to me, provide me continuous code review, the amount of retracing that I'm going to have is going to be minimal. Even is going to help me speed up the things, because there are some things that I would think that I know how to do it, but they have idea how to do it better. So it's not only not going astray for too far, it's actually even go faster in a given direction. So yeah, that's kind of the way that I think about it. Like we know that we're going to fail, and also in terms of the continuous delivery, minimizing time to recover is very powerful thing to have in these kind of systems that we know are going to fail. Because if we know that we can recover in a minute, we are able to risk more, right? So, and that's kind of a mechanism that is built in, that allow us to explore this space. I also, when I think about if I have a set of the tests that I am very confident in, and Treasury development provides me that, right, out of the box, then I'm able to try out so many things. Like, what happens if I call this method in a different way, or pass this, or inline this variable that thought that maybe is going to cause the problems. So it provides this safety net that allows me to explore this uncharted territory that I wouldn't be able to do so in a different environment. So it helps me learn actually faster as well, in a sense, because I can try more things in a unit of time because of this safety net, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I speed up the experience.
Yeah, you hit on something. We had a TDD conference last month. Excuse me, and I presented a talk. Actually, I was doing live coding. What I call self-healing systems. So I'm interested in not only embracing failure and all that, right? But when the system breaks, I want it to self-heal automatically. I don't want to spend any time fixing it. That's one thing that I'm not satisfied with TDD. We start with a broken system and then we fix it, and to me that is wasteful. And I'm more interested in automatic remove the breakage, because then we just focus on what really needs to get done. One of the problems I'm seeing rampant in the industry is that people benchmark the time they spent writing code, but they don't benchmark the time they spend debugging or manually configuring the environments, manually running the apps, manually navigating the apps, manually typing and logging in as different users and with different credentials, manually typing and retyping. All these things are super wasteful. Nobody keeps track of those things. I believe if we had a clear way of, for example, you could have maybe a editor extension that can keep track of debugging sessions and can produce the report at the end of the month and show it to the boss. Like, look, this is how much time people are spending debugging. Debugging is completely unproductive, almost non-productive activity. But because nobody keeps track of that, when you propose test driven, they're like, oh, we don't have time for that. It's just a fraction of time, actually, that you spend on those manual activities. Because, like you say, these are not, you cannot record them, you cannot replay them, but your tests are recorded and you can replay them at your heart's content. So that's another fallacy, I think, in our industry.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But another thing that I'm really struggling with is, to me, the biggest problem right now is code as text, and computers don't understand text, which then, by necessity, means that feedback loops are not immediate, and that is a huge problem. Because ideally, anything else we do, if we are crafting anything or playing an instrument or whatever, we get immediate feedback, like in real time.
Yeah.
And as Deming said, you cannot inspect quality into a product. After the fact, going and doing inspection, code review doesn't help. So I'm really keen on, to me, ideally, and this is science fiction, writing software should be the same as if you ever collectively edited a Google Doc. You may have 4 or 5 people working on the same doc. All the changes are live instantaneously. Not only that, but okay, because it's text, you cannot break the document by making a diff, right? So I think software should be like that. If you're working as a team on software, all the changes should be live, and we should be able to break each other's change, right? So that to me would be a breakthrough in software development, so that we do not. And I don't know if you followed Ken Beck's Limbo system.
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
So these types of things really interest me a lot, where it's immediate. Every keystroke is live, right? I think we need to get to that point as a profession, and then we can start really, delivering.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the XP push to the extreme programming push to the extreme is actually very close to that. If I get to commit every whatever half a minute or minute and push these changes immediately and it gets deployed because I have fast, reliable deployment pipeline, then we are kind of shortening this feedback loop in a sense, and it's at least a couple of magnitudes faster than what we tend to have in traditional environments. So that's kind of really interesting thought to push this even further in a sense. And
but another thing I think that we need to start seriously looking into is what I call accidental complexity. I think this is the biggest problem. I mean, code is text and accidental complexity. And we have, our entire industry is based on the Unix philosophy, which is worse is better, and you have millions of little pieces. That creates a lot of accidental complexity, which is absolutely not needed. But yet we're conditioned to accept it, and we have, huge machinery. And this is the big tech now, right, where they're making billions of dollars because we bought into that model. But I think there is a better way. I think that we can squeeze accidental complexity out of the picture. And that's also another breakthrough that we need to really make happen.
Yeah. I think there's I think we still, as an industry, have to discover the amount of things that should be done in the first place. So I write a microblog, and the title of the microblog is "Should we have this problem in the first place?" Which is, we just go and solve the problems and solve the next one and next one and next one. And we don't as often as we should have asked ourselves, shouldn't we have this problem in the first place? Are we going down the wrong route and solving the problems that are caused by the accidental complexity, not by the essential complexity? So I think there's a huge amount of, like, when you just think about face-to-face communication, low latency, high throughput feedback, really safe environments, and lots of safety net in terms of the code and changes and refactoring and stuff like that, reducing the batch size of changes introduced to the system, etc., etc. There are so many things that just kind of vanish that you don't have a need for anymore. They just become redundant in a sense. So who needs really a daily stand-up or whatever, a Jira board, if you're doing mob the whole day with the whole team? Everyone is
who needs PRs.
Exactly, yeah. So who needs to measure code coverage or whatever, it's like I've been developing also this tool that is used to measure. I mean, there are lots of things that it does in terms of the reports of this PR-based async process, but the idea of it actually is I don't charge for it, at least not for now, but even if I was to charge for it, it would be charged in a way that you get to pay it until you don't need it anymore. So until you change the process, the way that you work, so that renders the need for it. Um, yeah, what's the word? But redundant, right? So you don't need the tool anymore because you changed the process. You don't need to measure the wait time. You don't need to measure the engagement on the PRs. You don't need to measure the latency, the amount of feedback that you get, the latency in terms of when the PR is open, is it merged? What are people prioritizing, their own work or the PRs, PR reviews, etc., etc. So this tool is actually, that the underlying process is the need for this tool is indication of a flawed underlying process. So once we change the process, we're not going to need the tool at all. So ideally, you won't need to pay for it at all. So this kind of idea, also from the theory of constraints related to the throughput accounting and trying to change the way that you work. But yeah, I think we're just drowning as well in the accidental complexity, and so many things are just not needed if we change the way that we work. Like when I think about it, which XP team does have a need to measure code coverage, right? I mean, you just don't have a need for that. Like so many things are provided out of the box, guarantee that you're going to have the best possible metric in a sense that you don't have to do it. So yeah,
and also the open source model has been blindly applied in situations where it just doesn't make any sense, because majority, in my opinion, my experience, majority open source projects or products are tooling. And for tooling, okay, it's maybe a more, I don't know, it's okay to have non-cohesive teams from all over the world jumping asynchronously and proposing diffs, and okay, now you have a PR, that makes sense. But in a tight, cohesive team that are building business solutions that are very unique, open source model is really detrimental. But yet everybody embraces that, and there are PRs, and they're like, why? It really
licenses
is.
for GitHub and GitLab and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's completely I don't know what the word is. It's a misfit. Right? It just doesn't apply. And yet people religiously follow the open source model with feature branches, and it's so hard to change that, right? When you propose that, everybody's like, "Oh, you're crazy." But really, when you think about it, which open source repo is specific? Very few specifically, business policy rules that apply only to this particular company, because even in the same vertical, every company has different secret sauce how they do their work. So I really appreciate your continuous elucidation on these matters with frequent feedbacks and exposing the fallacy of big batches. And again, okay, if we now switch from big batches to small batches, what does that mean? That means that we're now stopping the proceedings where people go with a fine-tooth comb and spend days reviewing because if you had this graph, when you throw a big batch, everybody approves, just clicking button, approve. Nobody wants to even look into 500 changed files. Like, come on, I don't have time for that. So it really is a challenge now to abandon that and to increase the throughput, psychological safety, the rest. So I find a lot of value in what you're doing there. And do you want to add anything to that, or just point people to your blog?
Yeah. So I didn't write much about it on my blog. There's a talk that I'm doing. I'm kind of on a roadshow giving this talk, but it started that really I was curious about one thing, and it just I went down the rabbit hole. But the idea was me coming from an XP background, completely different environment that I get to than what I get to see in majority of the teams that I get to work with, is this low latency, high throughput feedback. And the things that I was really interested to see was how does these things look in the pull request based async code review model, which is, I guess, north of 95% present in the industry, sadly, right? So, so the way there are some insights that were kind of intuitive. One of those being this quote, "Never had a 300 line plus uh, pull request that didn't look good to me." Meaning that the bigger the pull request, the easier it is to to push it through, and yeah, exactly, and not to chase the quality afterwards in production incident or you know sort of that kind of thinking. And what I got to see is this exact thing that per line of code, the engagement gets exponentially up as we decrease the size of the PR, which is something that I got to see in the real world as well. People tend to engage more on the small pull requests because they have a chance to build the quality and to provide their feedback and to course correct if needed, compared to 300 lines or
and
500
the
lines of
and the
5,000
bike
lines.
the bike shed.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, and and that was kind of the thing that I was expecting. But the thing that I didn't expect is I was advising. I was also one of the people that was advising teams for small PRs if they're already doing PRs. Small PRs, are better than the big PRs. But what I got to discover, it was this systemic incentive that was driving the behavior in a certain way, and that was that the wait time per wait time being the measure of how long does a PR sits there waiting for someone's attention, right? And the how does the wait time per line of code looks like on a spectrum of the size of the PR. So what I got to discover is actually the PRs with a smaller size had way more waste per line of code than the bigger PRs. So on the bigger PR size of the spectrum, we're losing quality because we're not able to build the quality because we don't have ability to give feedback. The thing has already been done. We're not able to inspect the quality after the fact, right? So we are losing quality there, which also affects the throughput at one point in time. But with the wait time, we immediately lose throughput because in this, again, PR-based async workflow, because as we decrease the size of the PR, the wait time per line of code, which I interpret as the cost of code review per line of code, goes exponentially up, which means cumulative lead time, or how long does it take me to push through the system 300 lines of code with 15 PRs of 20 lines of code versus one PR of 300 lines of code is way longer. So because the waste in the system is exponentially higher per line of code as we decrease the size of the PR. So the throughput goes down on the smaller PR. So we are forced to make this trade-off, and and that's kind of a world of the pull request-based async code reviews, where people are forced to make this trade-off and to find this optimum batch size in a sense, and then comparing this to this parallel universe of continuous code review provided through pair and mob programming, which actually gives us, it might sound something that is people will not believe it, but you will get to have your cake and eat it. So you get both speed and the quality. Why? Because the cost of code review, as we decrease the size of the PR per line of code, is constant because I have immediate feedback all the time.
Yeah.
So we will be able to reduce the size of the PR. The transaction cost is minimal, almost non-existent. So we're able both to have high engagement, which means a precondition for quality, and we also don't lose the throughput because most of the lead time is actually processing time, which is a good thing to have. So, and that's the kind of the same conclusion that they got, that was also present in a sense in the Accelerate book that presented 5 years of DevOps research, dollar research, which was actually the conclusion. One of the conclusions was that you either have both speed, the throughput, and stability. Those are the terms from the DevOps world, which is maps to the same speed and quality, or you have none of these. So it's not one versus the other one, but it's actually both up or both down. So yeah.
And plus,
So, yeah.
what you described, I think, is also much higher, I would say, even though I don't have any metrics, but my experience, much higher rate of knowledge sharing and quickly spreading that knowledge through the team, which is a huge capital overall.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the buzz factor goes up. And also the other thing, it helps you with the anti-fragile systems because it drives the mean time to recover down. Why? Because you have more people that share the same mental model, because more people were involved in the co-creation. So when the outage happens, if it happens, there is going to be less likely that it happens compared to individual work. More people know about the details, so they'll be able to, you have more resiliency in the system.
And another XP brilliant concept, which is collective code ownership.
Exactly.
Code is authorless. There's no author, which is very powerful. Which I've had, it is what's the word? I've had people quit, leave the team because they just don't want to. I had people come to me and say, "Look, I worked hard for many years to build this expertise, my competence, and I don't feel like sharing with anyone." I think, these people leave. They don't like it, and I've seen that. So it takes a little bit of mentality, right? But also I'm noticing that a lot of people, at least in my experience, tend to confuse or conflate communication with collaboration. So they think that if you send emails around, if you open Jira tickets, you're collaborating. And I really want to draw a clear distinction that to me collaboration is in real time, face to face, synchronous. That's collaboration. Anything else is we are communicating, which is fine, which is needed, but it's much lower energy level, lower octane.
Yes.
And so when we are collaborating, we don't need to communicate. It's all in real time, right? And the quality is way higher.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I started using co-creation as a term, because collaboration has been, as Agile has been, microservices has been, or whatever, has been overloaded as a term. So when you see collaboration, it means so many different things to different people. And because of this semantic diffusion, I started using this co-creation, the term. I'm sure I didn't invent it. But it kind of, it's like trying to narrow down what actually type of collaboration I think of that we are going to co-create together in a real time. So,
interestingly, lately I prefer to call what we are doing software creation, not development, not engineering, not craft. We are creating software. Okay, I think we are coming to nearing the end, and I have to jump on another call. So this has been awesome. Thank you so much, Dragan. I hope we can continue. It certainly sounds like we are at the cusp of maybe seeing some substantial improvements. And again, I want to thank you for all your hard work and effort, sharing your knowledge. This is very, very satisfying. I keep, anytime I read your tweet, I'm just like, yes, I don't know how more to explain that. I totally agree. And always, I try to find a different angle maybe. And I also appreciate when I put something out when people try to shoot holes. That's very important. And again, this is the sort of egoless collective ownership. Nobody's a sole genius. We're just like working as a team. So on that note, thank you so much, and hope to see you soon. And have a great time in Berlin.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and looking forward to having a chat with you.
My pleasure. This has been really nice. Thank you, Dragan. Okay, signing out.